Hey guys, I wanted to make a quick video on the different kinds of reversion value methods that are out there in commercial real estate. So what I mean by the reversion or the exit or the sale price of the property is when you buy a piece of commercial real estate, you are inevitably going to include in your analysis an assumption on when you sell the property. So if you assume that you're going to hold the property for 5 years, then you're going to assume that you sell the property at the end of year 5. Now, in order to calculate what you believe you're going to sell that property at the end of your hold period, there are several different ways to do this. Now, I'm going to highlight the most common ones that I have seen in this video, and those include the exit cap rate method, a method using replacement cost, another method that takes into account the risk-free rate and the risk premium, and then finally a next buyer analysis. So let's jump into assuming an exit cap rate. Now, this is by far and away the most common way that commercial real estate investors will underwrite an exit value for their property. And basically what they're saying is that they're going to sell this property at the end of year 5 in this analysis. And when they sell this property at the very end of year 5, they receive all of this cash flow. The next buyer analyzes the property beginning in year 6. So that's going to be the first year that they're going to receive cash flow. And this analysis assumes that that next buyer is going to assign a cap rate to the net operating income that they believe they are going to achieve in that first year of ownership. So in this case, we hold the property for 5 years. And then in the 6th year of ownership, we're projecting that the net operating income will be $486,895. So in this case, if we're going to use the exit cap rate method, what we're going to do is we're going to assume some sort of exit cap rate and use that cap rate to come up with a reversion value. And our reversion value is going to be calculated in this case. If we go to the formula bar in cell B5 and hit F2, it's going to be calculated by taking J5 divided by B4. So we're taking that net operating income for year 6, which is going to be the first year of the analysis for the next buyer, and we're dividing that by the exit cap rate that we're assuming. So if we hit enter right here, we have our assumed reversion value of $6.9 million, and that is what we would assume that we would sell the property at. Now, we can change that. So if we want to change our assumption and assume that we sell the property at a 6.5% cap rate, then this will change and the reversion value will change. And again, it's still just taking that year 6 net operating income divided by that exit cap rate. So I'm going to keep that at 7% for now. Now, this is, again, by far and away the most common way to determine an exit value in commercial real estate. But there are a few more ways that are sometimes used to benchmark your exit projections. So the next one is replacement cost. And people generally won't use this outright. They'll use an exit cap rate analysis and potentially a next buyer analysis, but this can be used as some sort of a litmus test. So the way that I would do this is I would take the current replacement cost, and the replacement cost is what it would cost to buy the land and rebuild the building in the same location, in the same condition today. And this is usually a metric used by developers and investors to project supply projections in the future. Because if it's cheaper to build a new property rather than buying an existing property, then developers come out of the woodwork and they want to build properties because it makes more sense to build something brand new than buy something that maybe was built 10, 20, 30 years ago for a higher price. So in order to do this analysis, we need to assume some sort of a current replacement cost. And these assumptions are only going to come from talking with other professionals, talking with developers and construction professionals to make an accurate assumption on what it would cost to build a similar structure. Then you would assume some sort of an annual replacement cost growth. So if you assume that the replacement cost today is $6.5 million, then you would assume some sort of replacement cost growth, and I'm going to say 3% for this example. Now, the way that you would calculate your reversion value, if you were to calculate that based off of a replacement cost, so what would replacement cost be when we sell this property, you would use the future value formula. So if I hit F2, what you'll see if we go up to the formula bar is I use the future value formula to determine what 6.5 million is grown at 3% for 5 years. So I'm taking the rate, which is that annual replacement cost growth, 5 years. I'm not using a payment because I'm not paying anything into this. Our present value is negative B8, which is that current replacement cost. And then the type is 0. So if I hit enter, I have my projected reversion value based on replacement cost. Again, investors aren't going to use this alone, but they can use this somewhat as some sort of a benchmark. The next thing we're going to talk about is the risk-free rate plus a risk premium. And this is really all baked into an exit cap rate, but this can help you set your exit cap rate assumption. So cap rates in commercial real estate are generally based off of some sort of a risk-free rate of returns. So in the United States, it's generally referred to as the US Treasury rate. And then investors are going to assign some sort of a risk premium on top of that. So in this example, the way that I would look at this is we're making an assumption on what the risk-free rate would be in year 5. And in year 5, we're assuming that that risk-free rate is going to be 3.85%. So maybe the US Treasury today on a 5-year basis is 2.8%. And we assume that the US Treasury is going to increase up to 3.85% in 5 years. Then an investor is going to say, well, I can invest in that US Treasury bill risk-free. I don't have to do anything. I know I'm going to get paid back. And I can make 3.85% annually on my money. So if you want me to invest in real estate, or if I'm going to invest in real estate, I'm going to demand some sort of a risk premium on top of that. Essentially saying that I'm taking on additional risk and adding additional workload. And so I need to be compensated for that on a risk-adjusted basis. And that's how I'm going to price or value the property. So the way we'll calculate this once we have those two factors settled is we'll take the reversion value by taking J5, which is again that year 6 net operating income, divided by the sum of the risk-free rate assumption as well as the risk premium. So that's essentially giving you an assumed cap rate, but this is a little bit more of a granular way to go about doing it. Again, most investors won't go through the trouble of doing this. They'll generally just assign some sort of an exit cap rate, but it could be a good benchmark and another litmus test for your work. So finally, if you really want to get granular with your reversion value, you can do what's called a next buyer analysis. And the next buyer analysis assumes that the next buyer of the property will need to hit some sort of an IRR target. So in order to do that, we need to assume a few things. Number one, we need to assume some sort of an unlevered IRR requirement. So we'll assume that in this case, the next buyer that's going to buy this property will need to hit a 9% unlevered return. Then we're going to assume some sort of a going-in cap rate. And that going-in cap rate is going to help us solve for the reversion value and the next buyer IRR. So we'll come right back to that. Finally, we're going to assume some sort of a cap rate spread. And this cap rate spread is basically saying that we believe that the next buyer is going to buy at this cap rate, and then they are going to underwrite using a cap rate spread of 50 basis points, meaning that when they sell the property, they will assume that they sell the property at a 7.64% cap rate. So that's just derived by adding up 7.14% and 0.5%, and that'll get us 7.64. So this is how we're going to do it. The next buyer analysis assumes that they buy the property at a certain cap rate. So the way we do this is we calculate what their initial purchase price would be. So if I hit F2 on cell I9, this value is driven off of negative J5. So we're taking that year 6 net operating income and dividing that by our assumed going in cap rate. And that's going to get us our purchase price, and that's going to be a cash outflow because they're going to buy the property at that price. Then we're assuming that our net operating income assumptions will hold true. So that next buyer will look at our property and assume that the net operating income will be what we are assuming throughout years 6 through 10 of our hold period. Then we finally get out to year 10, and we're assuming that the next buyer is assuming a reversion value. So the way we're calculating that, if we hit F2, is we're taking 05, so that's our assumed year 11 net operating income, and dividing that by the sum of B19 and B20. So we're taking the net operating income of the next buyer and dividing that by our going in cap rate plus the cap rate spread. So what we are assuming the next buyer will assume as their exit cap rate. So that's a mouthful, but we're making a lot of assumptions in this case, and we have to if we're going to project this far out. So in this case, our unlevered IRR requirement is 9%, and we have a few assumptions down here, but it looks like our next buyer IRR is 8.94%. So in order to calculate what this should be, we can use a goal seek function. And the goal seek function, I can highlight any cell, and if I hit Alt A W G, that will bring up the goal seek window. And goal seek will allow us to find that going in cap rate that's going to make that next buyer IRR equal to 9%. And that's going to help us calculate our reversion value. So the way we're going to do this is we want to set this cell, J14, which is the next buyer IRR. We want that to be exactly 9%. So I'm going to type in 9.00%. And then we want to set that by changing the cell of the going in cap rate. And I'm going to hit OK. And Excel is telling me there's one or more circular references. That's okay. It's still going to calculate. Hit OK. And in this case, Excel hasn't fully solved this because sometimes goal seek is not perfect. And so we might need to do a little bit of finagling on our own to make this exactly 9%. So if we change this to 7.18, hit enter, we're closer. We're at 8.99%. So if we do 7.19, there we go. So we have our going in cap rate right here that's going to give the next buyer a 9% return. So now we calculate our reversion value after all of that. If we hit F2 by simply taking the year 6 net operating income and dividing that by the assumed going in cap rate, because that's the sale price that we're ultimately going to get if a buyer values that year 6 net operating income with a 7.19% going in cap rate. So those are the main reversion value metrics that institutional investors will use when they are projecting exit sale prices for commercial real estate properties. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.